And we are back for episode 6.4. Our episode begins with Ed and Jon arguing about whether or not Jon is freed from his Night's Watch vow by dying. Jon says that the vow states that his service ends with death, while Ed maintains that it's for this night and all the nights to come. Now, we haven't gotten this far in the book, but Jon being freed from his Night's Watch vows by death has been a long debate among book fans who wonder if Jon can legally wiggle out of the Night's Watch and go on to be Lord or King. And I do think that this debate largely misses the point of the vow. As it happens, the complete Night's Watch vow is only spoken one time in the entire book series, and its first line is the one that people often forget. The first line is, "Hear my words and bear witness to my vow." That is, the gods, either old or new, are the ones bearing witness. The vow is fundamentally a personal religious oath, not a civil or legal oath. Yes, our series opens with someone being legally executed for breaking their vow, but on two different occasions in the book series, there is discussion of freeing Jon from his Night's Watch vows legally, once by Robb and once by Stannis, and neither of these men think freeing Jon is a big deal. It's actually rather important that, at least in the book, Jon refuses Stannis on personal religious grounds, not civil or legal grounds. So really, whether or not Jon is free from his vows is largely dependent on Jon's subjective interpretation of his vows on a religious level. It's about what he thinks, not what others think. And frankly, no one knows how Jon will feel about everything if and when he comes back. He isn't exactly very consistent on his vows in the first place, breaking his vows and upholding them various times through the series. The show then has Sansa arriving with Brienne and Pod, Brienne makes an impression on Tormund, and Sansa and Jon are reunited and go off and talk. They reminisce a bit and Sansa apologizes for being mean to Jon, and then Sansa tells Jon that the two of them need to retake Winterfell from Ramsay. Jon says that he doesn't have an army, and he's tired of fighting besides. Now Sansa, Brienne, and Pod are nowhere near the north in the book. However, Stannis has sent to the Wall Sansa's friend, Jane Poole, who is posing as Arya. With Jon being dead and the Wall likely in chaos, we have little idea who will greet Jane Poole and how they will react. Jane Poole does have traveling with her Justin Massey, a knight ordered to buy sellswords for Stannis, and a woman named Alysanne Mormont, who, like Brienne, is a gender-bending strong female who fights and wears armor, though we have no idea if Tormund will like her romantically. Tormund is a bit older in the book, and there is some fan speculation that he is the father of Alysanne Mormont, as Tormund is called the husband to bears, with the Mormont sigil being a bear. The idea being that he slept with Alysanne's mother. Now, on the relationship of Sansa and Jon, in the book there's little about it, so we don't know if Sansa was mean to Jon at Winterfell or not. Jon rarely thinks about Sansa, and Sansa rarely thinks about Jon. When they do think about each other, their thoughts range from neutral to sentimental. Sansa was certainly mean to Arya, but the only mean thing that Sansa ever did to Jon that we know of is referring to Jon as her half-brother, and we have no evidence that either Sansa or Jon thought this particularly mean. On the subject of retaking Winterfell, Book Sansa has a more complicated opinion. Early in her story, Book Sansa certainly felt sentimental for Winterfell, but her memories are largely linked to her family, who she believes is entirely dead save Jon. Sansa later accepts that there's nothing for her left at Winterfell and that her new life is with Littlefinger in the Eyrie. But then it's Littlefinger who introduces the idea of marrying her to the heir of the Vale and having the Vale forces retake Winterfell. Sansa goes along with the plan, so I suppose we can assume that she's on board with retaking her home, but at no point is she really gung-ho about it. Next we have an extra scene of Davos confronting Melisandre about what exactly happened with Stannis and Shireen. Mel dodges the questions a bit and reveals that she now believes that Jon is the prince that was promised, and not Stannis. Brienne interrupts them and says that she killed Stannis and he admitted to killing Renly with blood magic. Now in the book, Stannis is preparing for battle, so we don't know if he'll die or not, and Brienne is nowhere near the scene to kill him. We also have no idea how Melisandre will feel about Stannis' supposed demise, whether or not she'll feel he's still Azor Ahai. There is an occasion in the book when Melisandre asks to see Azor Ahai in her flames, only to be shown Jon Snow, so it may be that with news of Stannis' death, Mel will become convinced that Jon is her savior after all, and will begin to follow him. We shall see. Now here in the show, Brienne brings up again that Stannis admitted that he was guilty of murdering his brother, but in the book Stannis believed himself asleep during Renly's murder, thus innocent. Stannis is actually guilty, his subconscious mind was part of whatever killed Renly, though Stannis doesn't seem to believe it. Next we have an extra scene of Robin Arryn hopelessly trying to learn archery from Bronze-Jan Royce. Littlefinger then returns with a gift falcon, much to the excitement of Robin Arryn, and Bronze-Jan confronts Littlefinger about him handing Sansa over to the Boltons. Robin comes to Littlefinger's aid by threatening to kill Bronze-Jan, and Littlefinger suggests sparing Bronze-Jan in exchange for his loyalty. Littlefinger then convinces Robin to help his cousin Sansa, and to rally the Vale army to invade the north. Now all of this is significantly different in the book. First of all, Sansa is still in the Vale, posing as Littlefinger's bastard daughter Elaine. Robert Arryn, Sweet Robin, is only 8 and has never been out of Littlefinger's custody after his mother's death, and has certainly not been with Bronze-Jan Royce, Littlefinger's primary rival. Book Sweet Robin also absolutely hates Littlefinger, but has fallen in love with Elaine. So any control Littlefinger has over Sweet Robin either stems from Littlefinger's legal status as the Lord Protector of the Vale, or through Elaine's manipulation of Sweet Robin. However, Littlefinger's plan, according to him, is for Sweet Robin to die and for Elaine to marry the heir of the Vale, Harry the Heir. Then the Vale forces can be used to retake Winterfell, at least according to Littlefinger. Of course, none of this has come to pass. Currently in the Vale there is a tourney bringing many of the lords together, and we can assume that the Vale forces will enter the story somehow. But it's uncertain what mechanism will be used to bring them into war, and whether they will actually head north into a blizzard. The Vale armies actually have many reasons to invade the Riverlands as well, as the Tully seat and Littlefinger's seat are there. And this does potentially make Sansa the heir to Harrenhal instead of Winterfell. Next we head over to Slaver's Bay for an extra scene with Tyrion welcoming the representatives from Yunkai, Astapor, and Volantis to treat with them, much to the disapproval of Missandei and Grey Worm. Tyrion quotes Littlefinger's advice to Ned about how peace is always made with one's enemies. We find that the representative from Yunkai is the same one from Season 3 who Dany mistreated, Razdal Mo Erez, while the Astapor representative is Yezzan Zokagez, who was Tyrion's owner for a while. Tyrion tells the slave traders that they have 7 years to end slavery, with the slave owners being compensated for their losses, and assures them that rich people exist in Westeros and Westeros doesn't have slavery. And he asks that the slave cities stop funding the Sons of the Harpy. He provides them with some sex workers, and then some locals come in and are worried about all of the bargaining. Missandei quotes Littlefinger's line to Ned and puts them at ease. But afterwards again, Grey Worm and Missandei express their disapproval, saying that the slavers can't be trusted. Now in the book, the relationship between all of these cities is markedly different. In Astapor, the former slaves went on to enslave the masters, and then went to war with Yunkai and were promptly defeated. The city was destroyed, leaving only its refugees. It was never represented by Yezzan. Yezzan is not a master of slave fighters in the book, but instead a morbidly obese, somewhat benevolent slave master and peace advocate who briefly owns Tyrion before dying of dysentery. Now with Yunkai, it did have an envoy that was mistreated by Dany, though his name was Grosden Mo Erez instead of Razdal Mo Erez, and he is never used to treat with Meereen, but instead travels to Volantis in an attempt to convince the city to side against her. So Dany's mistreatment of the envoy does come back to haunt her a bit. Volantis never sends representatives to Slaver's Bay that we know about. Now in the book, there are peace agreements between Yunkai and Meereen made by Dany, but they involve Meereen's port being used by Yunkai for slaving. Neither Dany nor Barristan ever demand that Yunkai or Volantis give up slavery. In fact, Dany assures Yunkai that they can go on slaving and that her interests are focused on Meereen. Additionally, in the book, Missandei and Grey Worm generally follow orders and rarely express disapproval of Dany or Barristan's actions. Missandei doesn't like Dany's decision to marry Hisdar and reopen the fighting pits, but that's about it. Villainization of the slavers and the old slave families is mainly given by Dany's advisor Skahaz, who wants to make war with Yunkai. Next we get an extra scene of Jorah and Daario arguing about Daenerys as they make it to Vaesdoth Rock. Jorah wants Daario to give up his weapons as they are forbidden in the city, and Daario notices Jorah's grayscale. The two sneak into the city and observe some sex out in the open, and then come across the Dothraki Aggo, who they are forced to fight and kill. Meanwhile, Dany is being informed that the Dosh Khaleen don't really have any power, and Dany asks to use the bathroom. She tries to bond with another of the Dosh Khaleen when Jorah and Daario come upon them and want to escape. Dany nixes their escape plan for something else. Of course, none of this happens in the book. Jorah has recently been freed from slavery and is fighting for the Sellsword Company II Sons on the side of Yunkai in the Battle of Meereen. He and Tyrion are last seen having just convinced the company to switch sides to Barristan's side. Daario is currently a hostage of the Yunkai somewhere nearby. The one with the grayscale is Jon Connington, who prepares for battle against the Tyrells near Storm's End with the Golden Company, but no one knows he has grayscale. And as we discussed before, Dany is likely headed to Vaes Dothrak to be part of the Dosh Khaleen, but the crew of men trying to rescue her are her Dothraki, of which Aggo is actually a member. Aggo is actually one of Dany's faithful blood riders in the book. Next we get an extra scene of the High Sparrow bringing Margaery before him. Margaery says that she wants to see her family, and the High Sparrow says that going to them is falling into the entrapments of wealth, and he proceeds to tell her a story of a time he once partied and didn't like it. Margaery is then allowed to see Loras, and she tells him to stay strong. Now, none of this happens in the book. We have little idea about the conditions of Margaery's imprisonment, but we do know that it was fairly brief, and she was handed over to Randyll Tarly. In the book, Loras is never imprisoned or arrested by the Sparrow movement. He goes off to retake Dragonstone from Stannis' forces and was purportedly gravely injured, though there are numerous inconsistencies in the tale, so fans wonder what truly happened to him. We then get an extra scene of Cersei interrupting Pycelle trying to talk to Tommen, and then Tommen reveals that the High Sparrow plans a walk of shame for Margaery. Cersei and Jaime go straight to Olenna and Kevan, hoping to use the Tyrell forces to take down the Sparrows. Olenna is convinced because of the potential walk of shame, and Kevan is convinced because he would like to get his son Lancel back. Now in the book, the Tyrell forces are brought to King's Landing from Storm's End after the arrest of Margaery, but this is done without any convincing from Cersei. They are yet to enter the city itself though, and in fact this movement is a lucky break for Jon Connington's invading force and their prospects for taking Storm's End. Connington's forces land not long after Tyrell forces leave. So here in the show, Olenna has to be convinced to act on the Sparrows, but in the book, the Tyrells are actually quite ready to deal with the movement. It's Kevan who urges caution only because they have so many foes at the moment: Stannis, Euron, and Jon Connington. At this point in the show, none of those threats exist. Now here Kevan admits that he wants his son back from the Sparrow movement, and we see the clear love of a father for a son and his worry for him. Oddly, in the book, despite Kevan having an entire chapter dedicated to him, he only thinks about Lancel briefly once. Let's remember that Lancel nearly died at the Blackwater, was made Lord of Derry, renounced it all, and then joined the Warriors' Sons, which is part of the Sparrow movement. And yet Kevan only thinks that he should put Lancel on the Kingsguard, which he believes is more honorable than the Warriors' Sons. Next we get an extra scene of Theon returning to the Iron Islands and having a reunion with Yara. She somehow berates him for her failed rescue attempt, and then is suspicious of why he's returned after Balon's death and before the Kingsmoot. Theon says it's a coincidence and that he wants to help Yara win the Kingsmoot and rule the Iron Islands. Now in the book, none of this happens. Asha has no botched rescue attempt of Theon, and Theon does not return for the Kingsmoot at all. In fact, after his transformation into Reek, Theon never even thinks about the Iron Islands or anything going on there. He doesn't think about his father's death, his rights as heir, Asha, his uncles, none of it. We know Theon knows about everything going on as he informs the Ironborn at Moat Cailin that Euron won the Kingsmoot, but that's all we hear about it from his end. Now in the book, Asha does worry about her claim, but her major competition in the Kingsmoot is her uncle Euron, who coincidentally arrives after Balon's death, and her uncle Victarion, who has been cut from the show. Asha is a much more reasonable and politically savvy character in the book, and she actually approaches Victarion and offers to either marry him and rule as king and queen, or barring that, be his hand. Victarion turns down both offers because Asha is a woman. Theon and Asha do have a reunion in the book, but it occurs in Stannis' camp 3 days from Winterfell. Asha had been captured by Stannis at Deepwood Motte and happens to be out walking when Theon, Jane Poole, Tycho Nestoris, and the rest arrive in the middle of the night. Asha can barely recognize Theon, and Theon uses their time together to update Asha on everything that has happened to him thus far before being imprisoned by Stannis. Next we get an extra scene with Osha meeting Ramsay. Ramsay asks if Osha is scared of being flayed, and Osha asks if he eats the flesh afterwards. Ramsay says no, and Osha claims that she's seen worse, making a reference to the cannibal wildlings. Osha then tries to seduce Ramsay, but Ramsay reveals that Theon told the story of how Osha tricked Theon through seduction, and so Ramsay kills her. Now in the book, none of this has happened. Osha has gone to Skagos with Rickon, last we heard, and is presumed alive. Additionally, in the book, the cannibal clans north of the Wall live in a pretty remote and isolated area on the Great Ice Rivers on the frozen shore, so it's rather unlikely that Book Osha ever really dealt with them. That said, coincidentally, the Skagosi are also rumored to be cannibals, so perhaps Osha has seen cannibals after all. Also in the book, Osha never seduces Theon. Theon was using a tavern girl named Kira as his bed warmer during Osha's escape, though Osha did seduce and kill at least one Ironborn at Winterfell, just not Theon. Next we have a scene of Jon and company eating a meal, and then we have the arrival of the infamous Pink Letter. Now the Pink Letter is one of the most talked about things in the book series, and thinking about this letter and debating the possibilities is actually what got me into Ice and Fire theory crafting in the first place. It's a huge deal for book fans, and here in the show there are some similarities to what is found in the book. So in both book and show, the seal on the Pink Letter is different from other letters that we see from the Boltons. George R.R. Martin spends an inordinate amount of time in his writing describing seals and having people verify the validity of seals, and the show's Pink Letter seal does not resemble a previously shown Bolton show seal. In the book, the difference is a smear of pink wax being used instead of a previously used button of pink wax. Now in the show, the varying seals turned out to be nothing, but fans think that there is something up in the book, theorizing that the Pink Letter is a forgery and not actually written by Ramsay. Now the show's Pink Letter does use some of the same language that the book letter uses, including calling Jon a bastard, the line "come and see," and "I want my bride back." Both letters use odd repetitive language, making some wonder if there's a code or hidden message in the text. In the show there was none, and after many years no fan has been able to find any definitive proof of a code. Both letters have a similar subject matter, demanding the return of Ramsay's bride, and both announce that Ramsay holds a prisoner valuable to Jon. In the book it's Mance Rayder, while here in the show it's Rickon. Now there are some huge differences too. The Pink Letter in the book is a big shocker because it claims that Stannis has died and demands a number of things from Jon besides Ramsay's bride, including Mance's son, Selyse, Shireen, Melisandre, Theon, and a wildling named Vale. The book Pink Letter also uses simpler language, mostly monosyllabic words, and it oddly doesn't refer to anyone by name save Mance Rayder. Stannis is only called the False King, Melisandre a Red Witch, Selyse a Queen, Shireen a Daughter, Vale a Wildling Princess, Theon Reek, Jon Bastard, and so forth. Now here in the show the letter was absolutely written by Ramsay, but book fans have a number of theories on other possible authors of the letter, including Mance Rayder, Stannis, Theon, Asha, other Northerners like Hother Umber, Barbary Dustin, or possibly someone in the Night's Watch, like a steward named Clytus or Bowen Marsh. Now the two Pink Letters do have a similar function in that they both convince Jon to head south to attack Winterfell with a wildling army. Though here in the show Tormund is heading south with Jon, in the book he's to head north to rescue people from Hardhome. And of course the timing is rather different, as in the book Jon is stabbed only a few hours after the Pink Letter's arrival. And finally, we have Dany with the Khals in Vaes Dothrak, who are trying to decide what to do with her. Dany proceeds to insult them, and they all decide that Dany deserves torture and death. Dany then tips over the braziers, a fire spreads quickly, and everyone dies except for Dany. Dany's fire resistance then causes all of the Dothraki to kneel before her. Now of course we're ahead of the book here, and we aren't sure exactly if this will happen, but it should be noted that Dany does have a vision of the Dosh Khaleen kneeling before her, who supposedly have great power in the book. And so it does seem that Dany will be taking leadership control of the Dothraki. Now, there is a rather large fan debate on whether or not Dany is fire resistant. Dany has always been shown as being somewhat resistant to heat as she enjoys very hot baths, and other Targaryens like Egg from the Dunk and Egg stories have shown resistance to sunburn. Of course, clearly something happened in the first season and first book that allowed Dany to survive the funeral pyre, but this may have been a one-time special event. And in fact, later on, Dany is burned by Drogon in the book, and George R. Martin has said in interviews that Dany is not fire resistant. So it's all a big mystery. Did temporary blood magic protect Dany? Did Mirri Maz Duur accidentally protect Dany with a spell when trying to protect herself? Did Quaithe somehow do it? Does Dany secretly have pyrokinesis? There is no definitive answer at this point, and it is an enduring mystery of the book. And that's all for episode 6.4. See you in episode 6.5.